Derek Whitman stood in the marble lobby of Brennan Financial Group's headquarters, smugness radiating from every pore as he looked at his ex-wife across the polished floor. "You never understood, Natalie," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "This is exactly why I had to end things. You simply lack the class, the sophistication to be an executive's wife. Look at you, still shopping at department stores, driving that old sedan. My new position demands a certain caliber of woman." He adjusted his Armani tie, completely unaware that the woman standing before him, the one he divorced 3 months ago for being too ordinary, had signed the papers just 48 hours earlier, purchasing 63% of the very company where he worked, the company he'd bragged about joining, the company he thought would elevate him beyond her reach. Natalie simply smiled, clutching the leather portfolio that contained the acquisition documents, and said nothing. The silence that followed would be the last moment of peace Derek Whitman would ever know. 3 months earlier, their marriage had imploded on a Tuesday, not because of infidelity, though that came later, not because of abuse or incompatibility. It ended because Derek Whitman, newly promoted to senior vice president at Mitchell & Sterling Investments, had decided his wife of 7 years no longer fit the image he wanted to project. Natalie remembered the exact words he'd used, sitting across from her at their kitchen table, the divorce papers already prepared by his lawyer. "You're a wonderful person, Natalie, but let's be honest, you're a middle school teacher. You clip coupons. You think Olive Garden is fine dining. I'm moving in circles now where appearances matter, where your spouse is part of your personal brand. I need someone who understands that world, someone who already belongs there." She'd sat there stunned as he continued explaining how he'd already rented an apartment downtown, how he'd be generous in the divorce settlement despite their prenup, how this was really better for both of them. He never once asked about her day, never wondered why she'd been taking so many phone calls lately, stepping out of rooms to answer them. Never questioned the expensive leather briefcase she'd recently purchased, so unlike her usual practical choices. If he had paid attention, if he'd been the man she'd married instead of the ambitious social climber he'd become, he might have noticed the signs. The late-night video conferences she'd explained away as parent-teacher meetings, the certified letters arriving from law firms in New York and London, the way her mother had started calling her Natalie Brennan again instead of Natalie Whitman. A small detail that would have revealed everything. Because Natalie Brennan wasn't just a middle school teacher who clipped coupons and drove a sensible Honda. She was the sole heir to the Brennan family fortune, one of the oldest money families in New England. Her grandfather, Thomas Brennan, had built an empire in manufacturing and real estate that spanned 4 continents. When he died 8 years ago, he'd left everything to Natalie, his only grandchild, in a trust that would fully transfer to her control on her 30th birthday. That birthday had been 5 weeks before Derek asked for a divorce. Natalie had never told Derek about the money. It wasn't spite or secrecy in the beginning, it was protection. She'd watched her mother's 3 marriages dissolve once the men realized they'd never control the Brennan wealth. Held in ironclad trusts designed by lawyers who'd anticipated every possible scheme. She'd seen cousins married for their bank accounts, friends who could never be sure if they were loved for themselves or their inheritance. So when she'd met Derek Whitman at a community volunteer event, when he'd been a junior analyst content with his modest salary, charmed by her laugh and her genuine warmth, she'd decided to wait, to see if what they had was real. For 7 years, she'd lived as a teacher on a teacher's salary, letting her trust accumulate under the management of Brennan Financial Group, the family's private investment firm. She'd driven the Honda her grandmother had given her for college graduation. She'd decorated their small house with furniture from Target and Home Goods. She'd been happy, believing Derek loved her for who she was, not what she had. His promotion to senior vice president had changed everything. Suddenly, their house wasn't good enough. Her wardrobe wasn't sophisticated enough. Her career wasn't impressive enough. She'd become, in his eyes, an embarrassment, a liability to the image he was cultivating among the wealthy elite who now populated his social circle. The irony was spectacular. Derek had spent 6 months networking desperately to get hired at Mitchell & Sterling, one of the most prestigious investment firms in the city. He'd bragged endlessly about landing the position, about the clients he'd be managing, the deals he'd be structuring. He'd framed his business card and hung it in his new apartment. He'd told everyone who would listen that this was his moment, his arrival in the upper echelons of finance. What he didn't know, what he'd never bothered to research beyond the firm's glossy reputation, was that Mitchell and Sterling had been struggling. The founders, both in their 70s, wanted to retire. Their children had no interest in the business. They'd been quietly seeking a buyer for 2 years, someone who would preserve the firm's legacy while injecting fresh capital and vision. Natalie had been studying the opportunity for months. The trust documents her grandfather had left included detailed instructions. Invest wisely, build the empire, never let the Brennan name fade into obscurity. Mitchell and Sterling was perfect, established, respected, and positioned for exponential growth with the right leadership. She'd had her lawyers at Brennan Financial Group conduct due diligence, while Derek was too self-absorbed to notice. She'd negotiated terms while he was out at networking dinners, schmoozing clients he thought were his ticket to success. 2 days after their divorce was finalized, she'd signed the acquisition papers. Mitchell and Sterling was now wholly owned by Brennan Financial Group, which meant Natalie Brennan controlled every aspect of the company, including Derek's employment. She'd let him have his moment, though. 3 months of believing he'd traded up, that he'd escaped the mundane life he'd shared with her for something glamorous. He'd moved a woman named Tiffany, a trust fund socialite he'd met at a charity gala, into his apartment within weeks. He'd posted photos on social media of them at expensive restaurants, art galleries, yacht clubs. Every image carefully curated to show the world that Derek Whitman had arrived. Natalie had watched it all from the quiet of her grandfather's estate, the 30-room mansion in Connecticut she'd finally moved into after the divorce. She'd spent those months reorganizing her life, stepping into the role she'd been born for, but had postponed for love. She'd met with the management team at Brennan Financial Group, reviewed the portfolios, learned every detail of the empire she now controlled. She'd studied Mitchell and Sterling's operations, identifying inefficiencies, planning reforms, preparing for the announcement she'd make today. The announcement that Derek knew nothing about, which brought her back to this moment, standing in the lobby of Brennan Financial Group's headquarters, listening to her ex-husband lecture her about class and sophistication. She'd arranged this meeting through his assistant, asking to see him one last time to discuss some remaining items from the divorce. Derek had agreed with barely concealed irritation, squeezing her into his schedule between more important meetings. He thought she was here to beg for a larger settlement, maybe to ask for help now that she was alone and struggling on a teacher's salary. The arrogance in his expression was almost comical. "I'm actually glad you reached out," Derek continued, checking his Rolex, a purchase he couldn't actually afford on his salary, but financed anyway for appearances. "I've been meaning to tell you in person that there are no hard feelings. You'll find someone appropriate for your situation, someone who appreciates the simple life you prefer. But this," he gestured vaguely at the opulent building around them, "this isn't your world. It never was." "You're right," Natalie said softly, her first word since he'd begun his monologue. "This building isn't my world." Derek nodded, satisfied that she was finally accepting reality. "It's my grandfather's world," she continued, watching his expression shift from smug to confused. "Thomas Brennan built Brennan Financial Group 60 years ago. This is the headquarters he designed. That's his portrait on the wall behind you." Derek turned slowly, looking at the massive oil painting he'd barely glanced at when entering. An older man with steel-gray hair and penetrating eyes, the nameplate reading, "Thomas Brennan, founder and chairman." "My grandfather left me everything when he died," Natalie said, her voice steady and calm. "I inherited this company, this building, and every asset the Brennan family accumulated over 3 generations. The trust transferred to my full control 5 weeks before you asked for a divorce. I'm worth approximately $3.7 billion, Derek, give or take a few million depending on the market." The color drained from Derek's face. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. No sound came out. "But you're right about one thing," Natalie continued, pulling a document from her leather portfolio. "I am a middle school teacher. I love teaching. I've been on sabbatical for the past 3 months, dealing with my new responsibilities, but I plan to return next year. Because unlike you, I don't measure my worth by my bank account or social status. I measure it by the difference I make in people's lives. She handed him the document. His hands shook as he took it. That's the acquisition agreement for Mitchell and Sterling Investments, she said. The company you're so proud to work for. I purchased it 3 months ago, controlling interest in all assets. The deal closed yesterday. The announcement goes public tomorrow morning, but I wanted you to hear it from me first. Derek stared at the papers, his eyes scanning the corporate letterhead, the signatures, the terms. His face went from white to red to purple as the reality sank in. You can't. This is legal, binding, already completed? Yes to all three. Natalie's voice remained pleasant, almost cheerful. I now own the company where you work. I control your salary, your benefits, your career trajectory. Everything you thought you'd escape from me. Everything you thought made you superior. It all belongs to me now. Why? The word came out strangled. Why didn't you tell me? Why did you let me think that I was ordinary? That I wasn't good enough for you? Natalie's smile finally faded. Because I wanted to see if you loved me for me. I spent 7 years trying to build a real marriage, Derek. One based on who we were, not what we had. And you know what? For a while, I thought it was working. You were kind once. Genuine. The man I married actually cared about making a difference in the world. Not just making an impression. But then you got promoted, she continued, her voice hardening. And suddenly, nothing about our life was good enough. I wasn't good enough. You didn't ask what I wanted, what I dreamed about, what I'd sacrificed to maintain the illusion of normalcy. You just decided I was an anchor holding you back from the life you deserved. Derek's legs seemed to give out. He sank onto one of the leather benches in the lobby, still clutching the acquisition papers. Natalie, if you'd known, you would have stayed, she finished for him. Not because you love me, but because you love what I represented. Money, status, access to the world you're so desperate to join. That's exactly why I never told you. I needed to know the truth. And now I do. She reached into her portfolio again, pulling out another document. This is your employment contract with Mitchell and Sterling. As of tomorrow, the firm will be restructured under Brennan Financial Group's management. We'll be implementing new policies, new leadership, new standards for what we expect from our executives. Derek looked up at her, hope and fear warring in his expression. Does that mean, are you going to fire me? Fire you? Natalie appeared to consider this. No, despite everything, you're actually quite good at your job. Your client retention rate is excellent. Your investment strategies are sound. Mitchell and Sterling hired you for your skills, and those skills have value. Relief flooded Derek's face. However, Natalie continued, and the relief vanished, we will be conducting a comprehensive review of all executive-level positions. That includes performance evaluations, cultural fit assessments, and ethical compliance reviews. Your position as Senior Vice President will be subject to that review like everyone else's. No special treatment, no nepotism, just merit. She paused, letting that sink in. There's also the matter of company culture. The old Mitchell and Sterling had some problematic attitudes about who belonged in positions of power, who was sophisticated enough, classy enough, worthy enough. We'll be making significant changes to address those biases. I'll expect you in the conference room tomorrow morning at 9, Natalie said, turning to leave. All senior executives will be briefed on the transition. I suggest you prepare thoughtful questions about how you can contribute to the new vision for the firm. And Derek, dress professionally. We're professionals here, not peacocks. Wait, Derek stood, desperation evident in his voice. Natalie, please, can we talk about this? Really talk? I made a mistake. I see that now. Maybe we could... Could what? She turned back, eyebrows raised. Reconcile? Get back together? Did you really think that was an option after you told me I lacked the class to be your wife? I was wrong. I was stupid and shallow and wrong. You're incredible. You always were. I just couldn't see it because I was too focused on yourself, Natalie interrupted. On your image, your status, your desperate need for validation from people whose opinions mean nothing. Yes, I know. That's who you've become, Derek. And that's not someone I want in my life. personally or professionally, but you said you're not firing me because you're useful to the company, Natalie said bluntly. Your clients trust you. Your deals generate revenue. But make no mistake, you'll earn your place in this organization the same way everyone else does. By merit, by integrity, by contributing value beyond your ability to network at country clubs. She walked toward the elevator, then paused. Oh, and one more thing. That trust fund socialite you've been posting all over social media, Tiffany Lockhart, she's actually broke. Her family lost everything in bad investments 5 years ago. She's been living off credit and charm, dating men she thinks can support her lifestyle. She's currently dating 3 other executives besides you, all of whom think they're exclusive. You might want to get tested. The elevator doors opened. Natalie stepped inside and turned to face Derek one last time. You wanted a wife who understood the world of the wealthy elite, she said. Someone who belonged there. I've been there my entire life, Derek. I was born into it. I just chose not to let it define me. That's the difference between us. You think money and status make you important. I know that character and integrity are what actually matter. Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock, she repeated as the doors began to close. Don't be late. I'm your boss now, and I expect punctuality. The doors shut on Derek's stricken face, leaving him alone in the lobby of a building owned by the woman he'd thrown away. The next morning, Derek arrived at Mitchell and Sterling at 8:30, the earliest he'd been to the office in months. The lobby buzzed with speculation. Rumors had leaked that an acquisition had occurred, that someone named Brennan was taking over, that everything was about to change. Derek said nothing to his colleagues, taking the elevator to the top floor conference room where the meeting would be held. Other senior executives filtered in, all confused and anxious. The founding partners, Mitchell and Sterling themselves, sat at the head of the table, looking relieved rather than distressed. That told Derek everything he needed to know. They'd wanted this sale. They'd been looking for an exit strategy. At exactly 9 o'clock, the conference room doors opened. Natalie entered, but she looked nothing like the woman Derek had known. Her casual dresses and department store cardigans had been replaced by a tailored Chanel suit in navy blue. Her hair, usually pulled back in a simple ponytail, was styled in an elegant chignon. She wore minimal jewelry, just the pearls that had been her grandmother's, worth more than Derek's entire annual salary. She carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd been trained from birth to command rooms like this. Behind her came a team of lawyers and financial analysts, all carrying tablets and folders. They took seats along the side of the conference room while Natalie stood at the head of the table. Good morning, she said, her voice clear and authoritative. I'm Natalie Brennan, CEO of Brennan Financial Group. As of yesterday, my company owns Mitchell and Sterling in its entirety. The founders approached us about an acquisition 2 years ago, and after extensive due diligence, we've agreed to purchase all assets and assume all operations. She clicked a button, and a presentation appeared on the screen behind her. Mitchell and Sterling has an excellent reputation and strong client relationships. However, the firm has been operating with outdated systems, minimal growth strategy, and concerning gaps in compliance and diversity. We're going to fix all of that. For the next hour, Natalie presented a comprehensive plan for restructuring the company. New technology systems, enhanced training programs, aggressive expansion into emerging markets, partnerships with community organizations to recruit talent from diverse backgrounds. Everything was backed by data, by market research, by careful analysis. Derek watched in stunned silence as the woman he dismissed as just a teacher demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of global finance that surpassed his own. She fielded questions from senior executives with ease, citing case studies and industry trends from memory. When someone challenged her on a particularly ambitious growth target, she pulled up a detailed financial model she'd built herself, walking them through every assumption and variable. This wasn't luck or inheritance. This was someone who'd been educated and trained for exactly this role, who'd chosen to postpone it for other priorities, but had always been capable of stepping in. Her grandfather had prepared her well. Now, Natalie said as the presentation concluded, let's discuss personnel. Everyone in this room will be evaluated over the next 90 days. Your performance, your compliance with ethical standards, your cultural fit with Brennan Financial Group's values. We'll be conducting interviews, reviewing client feedback, analyzing your track records. At the end of that period, we'll make decisions about who continues in their current role, who transitions to a different position, and who we part ways with. She looked directly at Derek for the first time since entering the room. This will be based purely on merit, personal relationships, social connections, country club memberships. None of that matters to me. What matters is whether you can do the job with integrity and excellence. The meeting concluded with assignments for each executive, reports to prepare, clients to brief, transitions to manage. As people filed out, Derek lingered, hoping for a private word with Natalie. She was gathering her materials, conferring quietly with one of her analysts. "Natalie," he said when they were alone, "can I speak with you?" She glanced up, her expression neutral. "Derek, what do you need?" "I just wanted to say, yesterday, when you told me everything, I was in shock. I didn't process it properly, but I've been thinking about it all night, and You want to apologize," she interrupted. "You want to explain that you made a mistake, that you see my worth now, that you'd like another chance. Yes?" He nodded, ashamed. "Derek, I'm going to be very clear with you," Natalie said, setting down her tablet. "What you're feeling right now isn't love or regret. It's embarrassment. You're humiliated that you threw away a billionaire because you were too shallow to look beneath the surface. You're panicking because the woman you discarded for lacking class turned out to be more powerful, more sophisticated, and more successful than you could ever hope to be. That's not the same as recognizing you hurt someone you loved." "But I did love you," Derek protested. "I do love you." "No," Natalie said firmly. "You loved the idea of me when I fit your narrative. The devoted wife who made you feel important, who supported your career, who never challenged you or outshone you. The moment I didn't serve that purpose anymore, you threw me away. That's not love. That's convenience." She picked up her briefcase. "You have 90 days to prove you deserve to keep your position at this firm. I suggest you focus on that rather than trying to resurrect a marriage you destroyed. Professional excellence is something you can actually control." "What about Tiffany?" Derek asked, a desperate edge in his voice. "You were right about her. She admitted she was seeing other men. She only wanted me for my income, my connections. Everything was fake." "Yes," Natalie agreed. "She's exactly the kind of woman you said you needed. Someone who understood that world, who cared about appearances and status. You got exactly what you asked for, Derek. I hope it was worth it." She walked to the door, then paused. "For what it's worth, I did love you. The real you, before ambition poisoned everything. That's why this hurts. Not because you left, but because you revealed you were never the person I thought you were. You were always this shallow, this status-obsessed. You just hid it better when you thought I was ordinary." "I can change," Derek said. "I can be better." "Maybe you can," Natalie acknowledged, "but not for me. Not anymore. You made your choice when you decided I wasn't good enough. Now you get to live with it." Over the following weeks, Derek watched as Brennan Financial Group transformed Mitchell and Sterling. Natalie brought in new leadership, brilliant analysts and strategists who'd been overlooked by the old regime because they didn't fit the traditional mold. She implemented mentorship programs, diversity initiatives, community investment projects. The company culture shifted from elitist and insular to innovative and inclusive. Derek survived the 90-day review, barely. His client work was solid, his numbers were good, but his performance evaluation noted significant concerns about his judgment and character. He was placed on a professional improvement plan, assigned a mentor from Brennan Financial Group, and told that his future with the company depended on demonstrating genuine growth. He sold his expensive apartment, broke his lease on the luxury car, ended his membership at the country club. All the trappings he'd acquired to project success, but couldn't actually afford. He moved into a modest condo and started living within his means, not because Natalie demanded it, but because he finally understood how hollow those symbols had been. He saw Natalie occasionally at company events or meetings, always professional, always polite, always distant. She'd moved on completely, throwing herself into running the empire she'd inherited. Business publications wrote profiles about her, the young CEO who was revolutionizing investment management with ethical practices and innovative strategies. She was dating someone, a doctor who worked in a free clinic, someone who shared her values rather than her bank account. Derek realized too late what he'd lost. Not the money or the status or the power. Those had always been there, hidden, waiting. What he'd lost was Natalie herself, her warmth, her intelligence, her genuine love. He'd traded something real for something fake, and he'd done it because he'd valued the wrong things. 6 months after the acquisition, Derek submitted his resignation, not because he was fired or forced out, but because he couldn't bear to stay. Every day at the company was a reminder of his failure, his short-sightedness, his fundamental misunderstanding of what mattered. He took a position at a smaller firm, one where he could rebuild his career without the constant echo of his mistakes. On his last day, he received a handwritten note from Natalie. It was brief, characteristically kind despite everything. Derek, I hope this next chapter brings you clarity and purpose. You have talent and potential. You just need to figure out who you want to be beyond the image you project. I genuinely wish you well in finding that person. N. He kept the note in his wallet, a reminder of the lesson he learned at a cost he could never recover. Class, he now understood, had nothing to do with money or status or social circles. It was in how you treated people, how you valued them, how you showed up when it mattered. Natalie had always had class, the real kind, the kind that couldn't be bought or faked. She'd offered it freely, loved him despite his ordinary circumstances, built a life with him that was genuine and meaningful. And he'd thrown it away because he'd been too blind to recognize what he had until it was gone. That was the story Derek would carry with him forever. Not that he'd divorced a billionaire, though that detail would haunt him, but that he'd had love, real and unconditional, and he'd valued it at less than a title and a salary increase. As he walked out of the building that last day, he looked up at the Brennan Financial Group logo above the entrance. The company his ex-wife had built from her grandfather's legacy, the empire she commanded with grace and integrity. Derek Whitman had wanted so desperately to belong to that world. He'd sacrificed everything to get there. And in the end, he'd learned he'd been married to it all along, too arrogant to notice, too shallow to care until it was far too late. 2.5 years after walking out of Brennan Financial Group's headquarters for the last time, Derek Whitman sat in a coffee shop in Portland, scrolling through his tablet as rain drummed against the windows. He'd moved to Oregon 18 months ago, taking a position as a senior analyst at a mid-sized investment firm that specialized in sustainable development projects. The salary was half what he'd made at Mitchell & Sterling. His apartment was small, his car was used, and he'd learned to cook instead of eating out every night. He was surprisingly happier than he'd been in years. The work mattered here. They funded renewable energy projects, affordable housing developments, educational programs in underserved communities. His boss was a woman in her 50s who'd started the firm with money she'd saved working 2 jobs, who still drove a 15-year-old Subaru and brought her lunch in Tupperware. She'd hired Derek despite his checkered past because she believed in second chances. But she'd been clear. Credentials meant nothing to her. Results and integrity were all that mattered. It had been humbling and necessary. Derek's tablet dinged with a news alert. He glanced down and felt his heart contract. The headline read, Brennan Financial Group CEO Natalie Brennan announces $500 million education initiative. He clicked the article knowing he shouldn't but unable to stop himself. There was Natalie's photo, professional, confident, radiant. She was announcing a partnership with public school systems across 12 states, funding teacher salaries, classroom resources, and scholarship programs for students pursuing education degrees. The article mentioned that she'd returned to teaching part-time herself, spending 1 day a week in a Title I middle school in the Bronx, working with students who needed extra support. Ms. Brennan states that education shaped her life and her values, the article read, and she believes investing in teachers and students is the most important contribution her family's wealth can make to society. When asked why she continues teaching, despite running a multi-billion-dollar empire, she simply said, because some things matter more than money. I learned that from the best teacher I ever knew, my grandmother, who taught me that privilege is only meaningful when you use it to lift others up. The article went on to detail Brennan Financial Group's remarkable growth under Natalie's leadership. The firm had tripled its assets under management, expanded into 6 new international markets, and become an industry leader in ethical investing. But what got the most attention was Natalie's unconventional approach. Profit with purpose, as the business journals called it. She'd turned down lucrative deals that didn't align with her values, invested heavily in companies led by women and minorities, and implemented radical transparency in all her firm's operations. Wall Street had been skeptical at first, then the returns started coming in, consistently outperforming traditional investment strategies. Turns out, companies with strong ethical foundations and diverse leadership were good bets. Natalie had proven you didn't have to choose between making money and making a difference. The article included a photo from a gala held 2 weeks earlier. Natalie stood next to a man Derek vaguely recognized, Dr. James Rivera, a pediatric oncologist who ran a nonprofit providing free cancer treatment to children in developing countries. They were engaged, the caption noted. The wedding was planned for next spring, a small ceremony on the Brennan family estate. Derek studied the photo. Natalie looked genuinely happy, laughing at something off camera, her hand resting comfortably on James's arm. There was none of the performative quality Derek remembered from his own relationship photos with her. The forced smiles, the careful staging. This was real joy. The kind he'd never given her because he'd been too focused on what she could do for his image, rather than who she actually was. "You okay, man?" Derek looked up. His colleague, Ryan, had slid into the seat across from him. They were supposed to be reviewing a proposal for a wind farm project in rural Montana. "Yeah," Derek said, closing the article. "Just seeing someone from my past doing well." "Ex-wife?" Ryan guessed. He was perceptive that way. "How'd you know?" "You get this specific look on your face whenever she comes up in the news, which happens a lot considering Natalie Brennan is pretty much the golden child of finance right now." Ryan paused. "Wait, you were married to Natalie Brennan? The Brennan Financial Group, Natalie Brennan?" Derek nodded, preparing for the inevitable questions, the judgment. But Ryan just whistled low. "Man, that must be weird, seeing her everywhere." "It is," Derek admitted, "but mostly because I'm happy for her. She deserves everything she's achieved. She always did. You don't seem bitter about it." "I was for a while," Derek said honestly. "Angry at myself, humiliated, resentful. But therapy helped. So did time. I eventually realized I wasn't mourning the loss of her money or status. I was mourning the loss of her, the person she was, the marriage we could have had if I hadn't been so monumentally stupid." Ryan pulled out his laptop, but he was still curious. "What happened? If you don't mind me asking?" Derek considered deflecting. But what was the point? The story had become a cautionary tale in certain business circles anyway, the details leaking out through gossip and speculation. "I divorced her because I thought she wasn't good enough for me. I'd gotten promoted, started moving in wealthier circles, and decided my middle school teacher wife was holding me back. Wanted someone more sophisticated. Ouch. Yeah, turns out she was a billionaire heiress the entire time. She just didn't believe in flaunting it. She wanted to know I loved her for her, not her money, which clearly I failed that test spectacularly." Ryan's eyebrows shot up. "She was secretly rich the whole time?" "Secretly running a financial empire the whole time," Derek corrected, "and I was too self-absorbed to notice. Then after the divorce, she bought the company I worked for, became my boss. It was..." He trailed off, shaking his head. "It was the single most humiliating experience of my life. And I absolutely deserved it." "Damn." Ryan was quiet for a moment. "But you landed okay. You're good at what you do here." "I'm adequate at what I do here," Derek said, "which is fine. I'm not trying to be the best anymore, or the most impressive, or the guy with the corner office. I'm just trying to be decent, to do work that matters, to not measure my worth by my job title or salary. That's growth, man. It's the bare minimum of being a functional human being," Derek countered. "But yeah, I guess it's growth for me." They worked through lunch, reviewing financial models and environmental impact assessments. The wind farm project was solid. It would provide clean energy to 3,000 homes and create 100 local jobs. Derek found satisfaction in that now, in the tangible good their work accomplished. It wasn't glamorous. It wouldn't make him rich or famous, but it mattered. As he packed up to leave that evening, Derek's phone buzzed with an email notification. His heart stuttered when he saw the sender. Natalie Brennan. He opened it with shaking hands. Derek, I hope this email finds you well. I heard through mutual connections that you're in Portland now, doing sustainable investment work. That sounds like a perfect fit for you. The Derek I married cared deeply about making a positive impact, even if he lost sight of that for a while. I'm reaching out because Brennan Financial Group is expanding our ethical investment division, and we're looking for analysts with experience in sustainable development. Your current boss, Margaret Chen, speaks very highly of your work ethic and integrity. She mentioned you might be interested in opportunities to work on larger-scale projects. This isn't a personal overture. I'm not trying to reopen old wounds or complicate your life. It's purely professional. We have a Portland office that needs senior staff, and you have relevant experience. If you're interested, I can have our HR director reach out with details. If you'd rather not work for a company I own, I completely understand and respect that. I also wanted to say, I saw your name on the supporter list for the Columbia River Education Fund. That's a wonderful organization. Thank you for contributing to teacher development programs. It means a lot to see you supporting the profession I love. I wish you continued success and happiness. Best, Natalie. Derek read the email 3 times. It was professional, respectful, boundaried. Exactly what he'd expect from Natalie. No games, no manipulation, just a straightforward job opportunity extended to someone whose current work she respected. The old Derek would have seen this as a chance to get close to her again, to worm his way back into her life through professional channels. The old Derek would have calculated angles and strategies, figured out how to leverage this opportunity for personal gain. The new Derek, the one who'd spent 2 years in therapy, who'd rebuilt his life from scratch, who'd finally learned what actually mattered, knew exactly what to do. He hit reply and typed carefully. Natalie, thank you for thinking of me. I'm honored that Margaret recommended me, and I'm glad to hear Brennan Financial Group is expanding its ethical investment work. The world needs more companies willing to prioritize purpose alongside profit. However, I'm going to respectfully decline. Not because I don't want to work for a company you own. You're brilliant at what you do, and any employee would be lucky to have you as a leader. But because I'm happy where I am, the work is meaningful, the scale is manageable, and I've finally found a pace of life that feels sustainable. I've learned that bigger isn't always better, and success isn't measured by salary or prestige. It's measured by whether you can look at yourself in the mirror and respect what you see. I'm getting there, slowly. Working for Brennan Financial Group, even in a different city, even purely professionally, would feel like trying to recapture something I don't deserve to reclaim. I'm glad you're happy. I see the news articles, the announcements of everything you're building. You're changing the world in exactly the way you should be, and I'm genuinely, truly happy for you. You deserve every bit of success and joy you've found. Thank you for reaching out. Thank you also for being gracious enough to recognize my growth, even after everything. That means more than you know. I hope your wedding is beautiful and that your life with James is everything mine with you should have been but wasn't. With respect and gratitude, Derek. He sent it before he could second-guess himself. Then he closed his laptop, grabbed his jacket, and walked out into the Portland rain. Somewhere in New York, Natalie Brennan read his response and smiled. She'd extended the offer knowing he'd probably decline, but wanting to give him the choice. His response confirmed what she'd heard through her network, that Derek Whitman had finally figured out who he wanted to be. It wasn't the man who'd divorced her for lacking class. It was someone quieter, humbler, more genuine. She was glad. Not because she had any interest in rekindling their relationship. That door had closed permanently the day he told her she wasn't good enough. But because she'd once loved him, and despite everything, she still wanted him to find peace. She forwarded his email to Margaret Chen with a note. He's a good one. Take care of him. Then she turned back to the mountain of work on her desk, foundation grants to review, investment proposals to evaluate, a speech to write for the Education Summit next month. She had a meeting with James for dinner, plans to finalize seating charts for the wedding, a life that was full and rich and meaningful. Derek Whitman was a chapter in her past, closed and learned from. She'd loved him once. He'd hurt her deeply. She'd survived it, grown from it, and built something extraordinary from the ashes of what they'd lost. That was the only revenge she'd ever needed. Not his humiliation, but her own flourishing. Miles apart, both Derek and Natalie moved forward into their separate futures. He'd learned what he'd needed to learn, paid the price for his arrogance, and found a quiet redemption in smaller-scale work that aligned with his values. She'd claimed her inheritance, transformed an empire, and proven that power and compassion weren't mutually exclusive. Some stories end with reconciliation. Others end with both parties simply becoming better versions of themselves separately. This was the latter. Not every mistake can be undone. Not every relationship can be salvaged. But every person can choose to grow from their failures, to learn from their pain, to become someone worthy of the love they once squandered. Derek Whitman had finally learned that lesson, and Natalie Brennan had always known it. That in the end was the difference between them and always had been.